Hi, today our discussion is going to revolve around circular reference. If you have built financial model, sometime or the other you would have invariably come across that. So what we are going to learn today is how to handle that. Let's right away jump into a problem. I had shared this problem in LinkedIn yesterday. In case if you have not seen it, here is the crux of the problem. In our model, we have a cash flow forecast, and in case if there is a deficit, we are assuming that the deficit will be funded through debt. But we are assuming that this deficit would be funded through debt somewhere in the middle of the year. And here we get a critical issue. What is that? If there is a deficit, we borrow. If we borrow, then there is an interest. And this interest expense results in higher deficit. And higher deficit again results in higher borrowing, higher interest, and it gets into what we call as a circular reference. Now, how do we handle this? What I'm going to do today is, first I'm going to tell you how it is handled in general in the industry, and then I'll tell you why that's a bad approach. Yes, 3 bads. I'm going to tell you why it's not good, and then I'm going to tell you what is the better way to handle that. So first let's talk about how do people in the industry generally handle it. So when you have a problem, what people do is they go to File, Options, Formulas, and in the Formula segment we have Enable Iteration. They just enable this. What does this do? What this does is, it runs this calculation on a trial and error basis for a specified number of iterations, which we have specified here. In this case, that is 100. So it's going to run this trial and error for 100 iterations, and then it's going to throw the results that's there at the end of the 100th iteration. So let me click OK, and wow, we have the answer. That's great, right? But what's wrong about it? I'll tell you what is wrong about it. The first one, not very critical but an important one. When you look at financial model, when you look at enabling iterations, you don't get to pick and choose where to enable, where not to enable. If you have enabled it in one part of the worksheet, that means it is enabled across your worksheet. In this case, here we needed circular reference, so Excel does it iteratively. Fair enough, that's great. But now I'm going to intentionally make a mistake. Let's look at this cash flow calculation line. So the formula here should be up to C10 and our result is in C11. Let us say by mistake in our formula I've linked it till C11. C11, which is the line for summation. So summation cell is referring to itself, which is obviously a mistake. I press enter. Wow. You notice Excel is not telling me that there is a mistake. It is rather giving me a huge deficit number. Why? Because I've asked it to accept iterative calculation, and which means wherever it comes across an iterative process, it will carry it out and throw me the end result. You may argue that this is the mistake of the analyst, that you should not be blaming Excel or the iteration option. Fair enough. But let me tell you some more issues as well. Do you know that this iterative option can actually throw you a wrong answer, and you may not even get to know it unless you manually verify it? Let me take you through another example. Here I have a quadratic equation. In finance, we do come across quadratic and polynomial equations, especially when you work with time value of money. Let's have a simple quadratic equation here, and I'm trying to solve this quadratic equation through iterative process. As you can see, this Excel is telling me that there's a circular reference error. What I'm going to do, I'm going to enable that iteration. Wow, I've got the answer for X. So now I know what is X, and when I see my final answer, it does match what my equation shows. So isn't that great? Where can it go wrong? Let me play around with some numbers here. Let me make A into -2. I'm giving a negative value for A. My model still throws me a value for X. But notice, this value for X does not give me the final output I want. It's giving me something else. So this X that Excel throws is actually wrong. But unless we notice, unless we manually check the final answer, we don't get to know that it's wrong. Why is it giving me a wrong answer? Because in this particular case, this quadratic equation does not have any real solution. The b square minus 4ac is negative here. But what have we done in Excel? We have enabled it to run an iteration and we have put a limit on the iteration. So it runs the iteration 100 times, and at the 100th time, whatever is the answer, it throws it out. This is the second issue. If you have worked on models where you have enabled iterative options earlier, just think about it. Probably you are responsible for quite a few catastrophes. You maybe do not know it yet. What's the third bad? Let me run this iteration a couple of times. Whoa, notice that a div0 error is there. How do we handle this div0 error? Let me go to cell E5 where there's a div0. It points me to cell H5. H5 points me to G9. G9 points me to E9. E9 is pointing me back to E5. That's where we started. Now good luck finding the mistake here and debugging this. You can keep looking at the dog chasing its tail for a while, but well, it's never going to catch it. You're never going to be able to debug this problem at all. That's the third biggest problem. So the three issues we talked about are: one, if there are unintentional circular reference, it will not highlight. Two, it can throw you wrong answers, especially where the right answer does not exist. Three, debugging is going to be a major problem. So what do practitioners do? One thing that they have invented is what's called as a circularity switch, where you have something like a checkbox. You click this checkbox, the circular reference will work. You uncheck the box, the formula will be replaced by some other formula or a static value. Now this is so lame that I don't really want to talk further about this. And I really don't know which genius invented this, but it's a very widespread practice, I should say. And I would say, please refrain from using it. It's a bad idea. So what is my solution for this? Very simple high school algebra. Let's look at the equations that we have, which is causing us the circular reference. So our interest expense equals interest on opening balance plus the amount we borrowed into half the interest rate, because we are assuming that the amount will be borrowed in the middle of the year. So we are only applying half the interest rate. The circular reference is coming because the amount we borrow equals the negative of deficit, because if there is a deficit, then we are going to borrow it. And this deficit is in turn equal to cash flow before interest minus the interest expense. Now interest depends on borrowing depends on deficit, which in turn depends on interest. And that's where we have a circular reference. Very simply what to do? Simply substitute equation 1 in equation 2. And when you eventually solve it, you're going to have this equation where we're going to say borrowings equal cash flow before interest minus interest on opening balance, the whole divided by 1 minus interest rate by 2. Of course, we're going to have a negative sign in between, because if the cash flow is negative, that means we're going to borrow that money. Let me put this in the model. Well, fantastic, it works. And there is no circular reference. I am not enabling any circular reference here. And our answer, you can verify clearly that the borrowed amount equals the deficit amount. Now this solution is possible if we are dealing with a linear equation or a quadratic equation. What do we do when we use polynomial equations? Sometimes situation gets too complicated, like IRR calculations. Your equation runs into the power of 5 and 6. When it's polynomial equation, the only option is to solve it through iterative process. In that case, can we enable iteration in MS Excel? Earlier, I would have said yes as a last resort. But if you ask me today, I would say no. See, today you have plenty of resources on VBA, in YouTube, in other websites. You can find too many contents, and it doesn't take a long time to learn. So if you are really serious about being a financial modeling professional, learn VBA. Write a function which will do this iterative calculation in the back end and will pull the final answer into your front end. Think of the IRR function in Excel. This IRR function in Excel does the same thing. It does the iterative calculation in the back end and gives you the final answer, which makes it easy for us to work. And I would say that's what you should be thinking about. But having discussed this, now let me come to a larger question. Why aren't many practitioners talking about it? Why are their discussions centered around circularity switch and iterations? I think that's mainly because we have put too much emphasis on MS Excel rather than mathematics. Over the last few years, knowledge of Excel has definitely increased a lot among participants, but I cannot say the same about mathematics. In fact, last year I remember in one of the courses I teach, I gave students a project to find out optimal capital structure. The moment they heard the word optimal, the radar turned on, they used solver, got me the answer. But then you know what? That problem didn't require anything beyond multiplication and division. And this is the issue that I want to address through my series of vlogs. And please don't mistake me. It's not like I hate Excel or spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets. In fact, I always keep saying that I owe a good chunk of my career to spreadsheets. In this vlog series as well, I'll be talking about a lot of spreadsheet techniques as well later on. But what I would say is in financial modeling, it's not just about spreadsheets. If not more, at least give as much importance to mathematics as much you give for spreadsheets. And circular reference is not the only area where people mess up the mathematics. There are many areas. And one such thing is compounded annual growth rate or CAGR. It's not in its calculations, but it is in its use, or I should rather say abuse, where you notice that people do not have adequate understanding of that. What issue do we have with CAGR? Well, I'll talk about that in the next episode. Until then, see you and take care.